अरे सब लोग आ गए इधर आना था क्यों आप ही चालू आपकी टीम से कोई देने वाला था Vinod, you sit here. You sit here. So much. Vinod, not connected. इससे होगा क्या? इससे कनेक्ट होगा क्या? नहीं आई थिंक बंद करना पड़ेगा नहीं ना बंद करना पड़ेगा इट्स नॉट कनेक्टेड the code and not set the complete example or something. Okay, so by the time this thing gets ready, let me just talk a little bit. So I just want to understand what is the current level of you guys. Like, are you complete newbies to React.js or completely new to front-end programming? How many of you already work on React.js? Okay. How many of you at some point have worked on things like jQuery or vanilla JavaScript? Okay, we had that era where we would say document.getElement by ID, right? Or you use that jQuery selector, get hold of something. Okay, we want everything to be ready for you. Okay, that is good. Till that time, I just okay. It says let's. Okay, finally. What's happening? Okay. So I'm not a big fan of PPTs, and I usually don't create PPTs also. But I thought this is important because it will give a structure to the entire, flow. Uh, so yeah, right now, when Gaurav first told me that they need some information on React, they would like to have a session and so on. I was just trying to understand the level, and what I could understand from him is that most of this audience is already working on React. They are comfortable with React, but then the problem is that when your application gets bigger, you end up creating a hierarchy of components. Some things, some problems begin to emerge. Typical ones are like sometimes your the state information, the data is spread across a large number of components, right? And sometimes what happens, you want to make a change on one component, and the effect is seen on some other component, which is like, to connect them you need to go many levels up. How are you going to handle these kind of information? Sometimes you have, what happens is, you update the state and the UI doesn't change. That kind of problems. How many of you have come across these things? Like when your application gets really big, you feel some things are like beginning to get out of place, becoming difficult to manage. Has anyone gone through such experience at any point? Okay, you have. Anyone else? Right. Okay. So why does that happen? So I felt the solution for this thing, there are so many new technologies developed. I think React.js themselves, when they put up a new version of React, they come up with many new things, right? Many new features, some lifecycle events, they deprecate a few things, but the underlying concept remains the same. Now, for all these problems that we talked about just now, having hi-fi features in the latest versions using different libraries, everything is fine. But I think what is more important than all of that is understanding the basic idea of React.js applications, understanding the fundamentals, right? So if you want to create something, a very large structure, I mean, like your understanding, so it's not about putting more things on top of it. It is more about strengthening the fundamentals. If you're seeing like for a huge building, the foundations that are put in are also that deep, right? Only then you can support that entire big structure. So this also works very much like that. So in this session, I just want to set the context for that. Is that I'm not going to talk about all the latest, hi-fi things in React and other front-end stuff, but rather the very fundamentals of how React works. And I think it is somewhere in those fine details that you get the solution to the problems that you are facing. What I'm talking about is nothing but the design, how you design your applications, and how React has changed the way you design your applications. And once you understand this and you stick to this discipline, I think even if your application gets bigger, gets more complicated, you will still know how to manage it because things will not go out of hands. Are we on the same page so far? Cool. So first thing, React.js has brought about a paradigm shift in the design style. What do I mean by paradigm shift? I'm talking about design thinking, right? Uh, how many of you guys are like used to program in those older days where you had C and C++, no object-oriented concept? Not many of us. Let me tell you, that was a time when we didn't have this OOPS concept at all. Or if it was there, it wasn't that frequently used or that well used, right? So the program was more of a set of instructions, and things would go into different functions. Like it was a procedure-driven programming languages. Okay, no classes, no all oops, pandas and all. Right. Then what happened? The object-oriented concept came. Suddenly, the entire thinking changed. Correct. You created classes, everything. You had programming languages like C# and Java. So there, that was a very radical change in the way you think over how to design an application. Right. Designing is that part where you read a problem statement. Problem statement could be the bug definition or the acceptance criteria of a story that is inside your Jira ticket or something. You look at that, and then you give before you start coding. I'm sure you guys wouldn't be starting coding right away, right? You pause for a while and then you think, what is this structure overall? What kind of application am I supposed to make, right? In React, a little bit more deeper, you need to understand what should go into the state, what are the components that you need, how you put the state, state information across different components, what should go into the state, and why should some things go into the state? Should everything go into the state? That is yet another question. So first, I want you to understand that a paradigm shift has happened, especially when you compare to the older days, wherein we used to play with jQuery and vanilla JavaScript. As I said in the beginning, that document.get element by ID. So in JavaScript and jQuery and all, what happened is that you have, like, suppose you are looking at one UI. Okay, there's some box here. User clicks a button and the contents of this box change. How would the programming structure be like? You have the button. On the button, there is an event handler. Event handler triggers a function on your page, and that function would typically be sometimes somewhere inside the script tag of that page, right? And there, the code would be something like document.get element by ID, some text box, and from there you read the value from that text box, do some computation. Finally, you get hold of another element on the UI called your labels or something, right? Result label, blah blah blah, and then and you update the value of that component, and finally your result is achieved on the screen. This used to be the way we think, right? Now, when you have this state-driven programming things like React or Angular, okay, let's not talk about Angular. Let's confine ourselves to React now. There is a fundamental change. You no longer do this. Okay, there are two things: what and how. Can I just use the board? Do you have markers there? Yeah. Thanks. So when you are thinking in terms of React.js applications, you need to think of two basic things. That is, what and how. Okay. Now, React.js, and the magic of React.js is all about rendering things. Now, here is the basic difference when you're coding with these type of programming languages. You need to first think in terms of what you want on the screen, the data, and how you want it to be rendered. Okay. What will contain data, which could be a JSON structure having some key, some set of values, blah blah blah. Okay, you're telling the system what you want to be rendered on the screen. Okay. In the other portion, which is your logic, there you tell the system how you want the data to be rendered on the screen. Means, read this input, and here is the sequence of steps you need to follow to render a thing on the screen. So this would probably be something like what you write inside the render function. Correct. I think you guys have told me upfront that most of you are already programming on React, so I don't want to spend time explaining what is render function and what do we mean by state and all. Am I doing that safely? It's a safe assumption? Yeah. Okay. So render is the how part. Render or anything else that has to come on this side. So here there are two distinct things, what and how. This is a one-time explanation you give to the system. I repeat, this is a one-time explanation. You only tell the system once. Data is what keeps changing. Now suppose I want some change on the screen. Going back to that example of that button. When that button clicks, how am I going to handle the event now? I will change something here inside the state. I'll say set state. That's it. The process ends there. I update the state, which is basically some change in a JSON or something. Nothing further. My job is done. Updating from here, updating the UI is entirely outsourced. It is outsourced. The way we outsource most of the, many of the things inside our organizations and inside teams, etc. Right? When you're outsourcing something to somebody, you just tell them clearly what you want from it. Right? You establish a contract. I'll be giving you some information in this format. You have to read it and you have to do so and so rendering tasks for me. Once I explain it, we are done with the deal. From now on, I'll only modify this. And once I modify this, since I have outsourced this, I am not supposed to play around with what has been outsourced. That is a bad practice. It's like I outsource a part of my organization that these things are your responsibility. Then I should allow you to work on it. If I further, without your knowledge, I go on messing around with those things, that is wrong. Because it may hamper with the way you have structured your work. Right? Coming to, being specific on React.js terms, what I mean by messing around with something that has been outsourced, directly working on the DOM. Right? Many people, at some point, you and I used to do this, and we all have, at some point, have been guilty of this. We create a state, we write the render function, we put the data inside the state, render function creates the state and it displays the UI, the application works fine. But for some new requirement or something comes up, if I feel a little bit lazy or probably we don't know what the reason is, we sometimes use jQuery or vanilla JavaScript to get hold of some functions, get hold of some elements, and then say .hide, .set attribute, .val or something. Right? Now what happens is that this guy, the how part, knows how to create the UI in sync with the given state. You have changed the UI. Here the data is still old. This is not updated. So then you have come across some bugs like you click a button and the functionality is still as it is or it is not behaving the right way. Are you guys able to relate this with what you have experienced at some point? With the kind of bugs that you have faced? Yes or no? Yes. Right. Quite a common thing. So the point is, respect the state, respect the way you have programmed it, because at a small application level it looks fine, things work, but when the application gets bigger, these are the small things which also sum up when your application scales up, right? And this hurts you very badly at some point. So just reading the second point, developers benefit from understanding how rendering happens. Think in terms of what and how. When you read a problem statement, do think over it and decide, well, is there some modification to the structure of incoming data that you want to play with? Or does this requirement need me to change the how part? Is it something that goes here or something that comes here? And to do this in the best possible way, you need to actually spend some time with your problem statement before you begin to code. Right? Because in jQuery it used to work. In React it doesn't. Second, outsourcing the how part, right? React.js optimizes rendering. Does anyone here have an idea or at some point have CAC off. Thanks. Okay.
React.js works on something called as a virtual DOM.
Yes.
And it maps itself to the actual DOM.
Absolutely.
And it tracks the changes in the state and only recreates the part that is changed in the virtual.
Absolutely. This is what I was coming to. So, your browser has a DOM structure, right? There is one HTML element, head, body, blah, blah, blah. Everything that you see on your inside your browser belongs to this DOM. What React does, so they are going into a little bit into what React.js does internally. As end users of React, it doesn't really affect us much. But the point is, since you're working with it and to make the best use of it, it is important to understand and appreciate how it does this magic internally. So as you rightly said, this DOM, React creates a virtual copy of this DOM. Why does it need to do this? Any rough thoughts? Any guesses?
So that you can compare and check the
completely updated DOM. Because when you're directly modifying the DOM, it triggers a re-render, and we are trying to avoid that and minimize that.
You are very close to it.
Yes.
Partially and
It's not there.
yeah.
You render when all the states are.
Right. So the point is that the DOM elements the actual DOM that is on the screen is something you can think of it like very heavy objects, very difficult to move them around, very difficult to manipulate them. Right. So when you have some change that needs to actually move the DOM thing, that is a very expensive part, and that cost comes into play when the application gets bigger. Okay. So what this guys did. So for all those plain work, for all those manipulations, let us not do it here, let us do it here. This is actually a JSON object inside. Okay, and because this is just an object, it's easy to play with this. This is a virtual DOM. So it has a present state, let us call it S1. And you made some changes and said this dot set state, blah blah blah. So that is S2. S1 is current DOM. S2 is our target state, the newly set state. So what it does is it does a comparison of these two using something called as the diff algorithm. Okay, it makes a very 1:1 comparison and finds out what exactly has changed. This is what is currently on the DOM. This is what we need to put it inside the DOM. It finds the minimal amount of change it has to do from this state to reach this state. It calculates. And once that is done to the DOM, it pushes only the minimal changes, right? So pushing things into the DOM is a costly process. So that is now minimized. Okay, that is the reason why React is able to achieve magical results when it comes to performance in the rendering aspect.
So, yeah, question is, I have a team. I have taken chance 3 years. Tomorrow, after some time, it will I get 3,000.
Yeah.
I'm not using React. So how does actual DOM will be updated? And how does React will come into picture if it comes in?
Okay, so you have a table. Okay.
Currently having 3
records are there. Okay. Some event happens and then you get the tree becomes 3,000. So in this case, it has to put new things on the DOM. But let us say, okay, so then this thing will not make a huge contribution to that respect because ultimately the new things have to go to the DOM. However you do it, right? The thing comes into picture where let's say you already have 3,000 records and you put something in between.
Yeah, I'm updating it.
Or yeah, you're updating it, or you are doing anything that will take a lot of adjustments. You need to move things around on the UI.
Okay. So in that case, React will update only my virtual DOM and figure out where the changes in DOM should be.
It will first update the virtual DOM. It makes the comparison, and then it finds out what is the minimum amount of change that has to go, the minimum delta that has to be pushed to the DOM.
And in normal case, without React, it has to go through all the records and then find out. That's what we see.
May not be exactly like that. I'm sure the browsers will have some optimization tools. But at the end, this is the input given to it, the browser. right? So yeah, that's how it is. So the intent is not to show you how the bit by bit things happen and how the steps are reduced, but the point is, since this happens, and this thing happens when you set the state, changes have to go into the state, right? And that's one of the reasons why React also keeps saying don't say just update the state like this dot state dot something is equal to something. That shouldn't be done. Always call set state. Let React be aware that the state, that is the thing that it needs to update on the UI, has changed, right? Because it has to do its view, computations. Uh, can somebody just Okay, so your application has a lot of components. Now you, again, a typical programming problem. You look at a problem statement, and you need to decide what things will go into the state. How do you distribute this? I mean, how do you break it into components? Which component will do what function, and how do you, spread your state information across the components? For people from the OOPS background, this shouldn't be that tough because again, in object-oriented programming, the very intent is to create separate classes which address separate concerns, right? I guess all of us have come across object-oriented concept at some stage, right? So this is also very much on the similar lines. Just look at the statement, think how you will make things into reusable components. Each component should get well-defined inputs, right? It should be like any object in general. Its input should be well-defined, what it will get, in what structure it will get information, and with that information, what it is going to do. So if you think the application would get too complex with a large hierarchy of components, consider using Redux. So let's say a typical thing. Why do you need Redux? Have you ever thought about it? How many of you are completely blank about Redux? I mean, okay. Sorry guys, I need to come there again. No, just be there where you are. It's fine. Okay. So if you have, let's use your root component, hierarchy, something like this. You can have React applications like this, right? Where each circle or where each node is actually a component. This has some information or state. This doesn't have any props coming to it because it doesn't have any parent to pass on anything to it. Right? Now, some information comes down in the form of props. Is this one-way binding or two-way binding? I mean, is this one-way flow or bidirectional flow? Clearly one-way. Problem, that's where the problem begins. This guy will tell this guy some props, display so and so stuff. And this guy will, do the changes accordingly. But what if this also takes some input from the user? This has a text box or something, or a button, user clicks something, things have to go back, right? Suppose if some action done on this affects this, or maybe a child of this. That's where things begin to get messier, right? To update its parents, and then and how do you usually do this? You call a callback function, right? So at the end, for this from A to B change, this guy will have a callback function, right? It will pass to this, it will pass to this, and here the data goes from here. This calls the callback here. from here, it gets really, messy. Are you able to relate this to something you have come across and faced this issue? So till this size it is fine, but just imagine what if the hierarchy gets very huge. So how does Redux help this problem? Now when you're dealing with a hierarchy of this, the fact remains that everything needs to have some local data to manage its own internal things. Right? At the same time, they need to transfer things, some data. There is no solid mechanism for that. So Redux, you can think of it like a cloud over the entire thing, a common data store. Each component has access to read and write from this. Everything. Does this solve the problem? It does. Yes. Okay, but if you have actually used Redux, we use Redux. This does address the problem, but then it makes programming a little bit tougher because you put things into Redux and bring out things from the Redux. It's not as simple as just saying this dot set state, right? And you cannot have a whole bunch of logic for updating even the smallest actions. Am I making it clear? Right. So now, how do you handle it? So, the way we evolved, I worked in the SimCommerce team that is formerly called ABC team, and we have that cockpit. If anybody has used it, right? In the beginning, we had one version of cockpit. I'm talking about things about 2 years back from today. That was completely based on this. We only had React, no Redux. Then we realized these kind of problems, and we were also aware of something called Redux inside the market. So then we made some changes, refactored the whole thing, started using Redux. Now we are also new to the Redux thing, and we didn't know how to use it properly. Then what happened? We had the habit of putting everything inside the state. All the data inside Redux, because we thought this is the new way to code. Put everything instead of using the component level state, you put it inside the Redux store, and your life is sorted. Life was not sorted because for everything you cannot access the Redux store. So now, what do? Decide in your application what is that data which is common for all the components, and what things are local to the specific component that you are dealing with. This is the thing we learned in a very tough way, right? So if you are using Redux, be aware that what you put in Redux is only the part that is common, like some common configuration, app level settings, or whatever specific to your application.
But what is the problem? You put everything in Redux.
No, it's not about performance. It's about accessing Redux. So I don't want to go deeper into Redux for this discussion, but the point to tell you is accessing things inside Redux store and getting it back and using it is not that easy. When it comes to coding, like we want to put just one line and say this dot set state done, or this dot state dot data dot something access my information. We need that convenience when we are writing all the finer code. Okay, so
Coming back to this, push code in Redux.
okay.
You said that if you have something that is coming down from the root, should coming down to the child mode and then updating some other child mode, you should definitely go to the Redux.
Yeah.
Right. But where do we draw the line? Is it like only one parent here? When you say I have something which is used only by component, it will need that to plus state.
Are you asking me when do we know that we need to use Redux?
Where do I draw the line?
Well, it's a very subjective thing. For instance, if I have a huge application and I feel whatever complications there, I'm there to write and code. I'm there to handle it. I know how to handle it. Forget Redux then. Correct? It's a very subjective thing. There is no golden rule. In fact, I believe there shouldn't be any golden rule also. Right? Because when does Redux come into picture, when you actually have some data which is needed by everybody, or at least by some components which are in faraway states. If the nature of your application is such that these things together form a group which has very limited, interaction with the outer world. Maybe your things will, this guy will take care of all the outside communications, just like some team lead or something, or a manager, and these guys will all report to this guy. You understanding? React comes. All these things will be managed here. Here the state will be like the golden.
So this node will have the next state, everybody will go to this state. And
Correct.
if something going out of these three components, then we
This guy will trigger it, and again it's only one level, so and it works. So that's the reason I said there shouldn't be any golden rule to follow on this. I think it is something you realize as you gain experience coding under different scenarios, and that's the reason why I chose not to touch all those high level things, because there is ample documentation, videos, everything available on the internet, and I'm sure the guys in this audience definitely know how to access them, how to use them. And in fact, even if I do explain all those things, let's say you need to use it even 1 week down the line, you have to access some information outside, right? So that's why I wanted to, focus more on these fundamentals and how you code rather than on all those latest stuff. Good so far? Okay. Last point, but a very, very important point. Those three letters at the bottom. Keep state minimal. So state is the variable part of your entity, right? State should only be restricted to that. If any information, like if 3 bits are there, x, y, and z inside the state, it means that if any one of them undergoes a slight change, the UI has to change. If y changes and UI doesn't have to change, then y should not find any space inside the React state. Got to keep the state minimal. Why? State is what is used for doing all those comparisons, arriving at the optimal solution. Why unnecessarily make things bulkier? And guys, whenever I'm saying state, just at the back of your mind, do think of props also. I don't want to say state and props everywhere, but then I think you guys can understand how they're both like more or less the same. What time is it? Like? 3:45. Okay, it's 15 minutes, and then we have to come to the service, right? Okay. Keeping state minimal, fine. So one question before we move away from this slide. If I'm to keep the state minimal, if y is not allowed inside state, where should I keep it? Props. No. Props cannot be a substitute for state.
You could keep a constant and get it populated in the.
Keep a constant and populate it inside the constructor.
Would that be the same as?
No, props is something. Props basically control who you give to the parent. Right.
Class level there. Put it on a class level.
Exactly. Put it on a class level variable. In JavaScript, what we usually do is put it inside this. So y will not be inside this dot state dot y. It will be just this dot y. So if changes in y, our React setup will not be disturbed. Okay. Can somebody please just move the slide? Thank you so much. What not to do, the common mistakes that most people make. I think I've spoken about most of these things already, but let me just walk you through these points, just 5 simple points. Modify DOM directly. You have outsourced it. Have already spoken about this before, I think I have. Right, DOM, the rendering part, once the state is given or props is given, how to use this information and follow a certain sequence of steps and arrive at the desired UI. That is something very well explained to your React by means of the render function. Right? So let it completely manage the DOM. DOM management is outsourced. Don't mess with DOM, because then the UI and the React state may go out of sync with each other. Or if you find that you are completely stuck in a problem, somebody is waiting for a hotfix, then you do it. But be aware of what you are doing, right? Be aware that React doesn't know what you have done, and it may misbehave at some point. Putting all data into the state, already discussed. Writing business logic inside render, yeah, that's a very important point. The React.js has a render function where sole purpose of the render function is read the props and state, and how should the UI look like given the current information in props and state. This is the only information, the only motive of the render function. Please don't put anything else inside render function. It's a very, very sensitive area. Why is it so sensitive? Any guesses?
It's triggered every time states. Okay, it will take time to and then
Yes.
render again.
Yeah. Forget that. This is not even calculation because the render function, when it begins, it goes on executing something blah blah blah, and in the end you have a return statement where you put the entire thing into the DOM. Correct? Here, if you have some function which actually, let's say, makes an Ajax call or does some very complicated calculations that goes into several loops or something, this area is triggered every time you put a set state or every time the props coming from a parent component changes. Right? So unnecessarily you don't have that. You have that thing happening again and again and consuming all your time. In fact, one of our this is something in cockpit we have come across at some point. What happened is that your user clicks on a certain area, right? Sorry, user clicks anywhere on the screen. There's a huge grid on the front page. Click anywhere, the system hangs and actually behaves very slowly. You can actually, it goes into seconds, not even milliseconds. So what's happening in and we had no clue. We haven't seen something like this. We were looking at performance metrics, what that this, what is where, and we are clueless about what is happening. And finally, what happened was that some very heavy process was being triggered from the render function. And this computation was needed, but it was happening in the render function. How did we fix it? Move this outside render function. And you need to determine, is this something that needs to be done on every render? Or let us say, inside my state, XYZ things in the state, there is one thing called X, such that if X changes, then this whole computation needs to happen. Okay, then what I can do is, there's a lifecycle event called component did update. There you get previous state or previous props as well as current state and current props, right? Previous state and props are input parameters in that lifecycle function. I guess you guys will have used it or at least be aware of it. Use that and see if the X was changed from the previous update. And only if X was changed, do this calculation, right? And if there is no such X kind of thing, the entire calculation is one time. Do it in the loop process. But please don't put it inside render. It is very costly, and we have actually spent a lot of time doing on this. And when we had this problem, we were not even new to React. It was a good well above 1 year all of us had experience working on React, and still we got trapped in this. Okay, so this is something to be very careful about. Render function, be aware, it is very, very sensitive part. Be very careful what you put inside render. Calling set state before rendering is complete. Another thing many of us do. So most of these points that I have written, it is because of some mistakes that I have made at different stages, and I just thought over it yesterday. What are the things that biggest goof ups that we have made, and this is basically a compilation of all that. Okay, calling set state before rendering is complete. Why should that not be done? It doesn't always trigger an infinite loop, but sometimes you just see a warning on the console.
Before a component is mounted, you cannot change the state.
Yeah, you shouldn't change the state. So in the beginning, if you want something, it should be like inside the constructor, you can say this dot state, right? Because it is just before the rendering process that it looks into whatever there is there in this dot state, and then renders things accordingly. Set state is basically covering this gap, S1 and S2, that we have talked before. But if S1 is not established at all, then what will set state do? Initial rendering itself is not complete. At that point, if you come across something that you need, that you know has to be put inside the state, just put it in this dot state. That's it. And what is a must do before render is a never do after render. If you want to update X before rendering, it should be this dot state dot X is equal to whatever. But once the rendering is completed, you should never do this. It should always be this dot set state. Okay, so how you handle this is up to you. You know the concept, right? I guess this is the last slide. Okay. Sorry. So before we wind up, I want to show you one example for some code. Oops. Okay. I'm able to move with this mouse, but click works only here. Strange. Do you all use this React Chrome plugin? I hope all of you do. It's an essential. Similarly, if you're using Redux, again, you have a similar plugin for Redux also. Is the screen visible to all of you? Okay. Oops. So here you have. Here we go. A very simple React application. I know this is more of a formality's sake. So the points have already been covered. In the initial thing, I have just two things on the inside my state. I have just two things: table data and form data. Inside table data, I have two. It's an array currently of two objects. First one is pen. Price is 50, second one is cap, price is 80, and it is this, and total price is given here. Okay, so if I want to add something, I put it here. So my status form data is basically this form. I say I have pen, cap, let's say marker, cost, let's say 20, and I say, okay, sorry, I forgot to show you marker and cost were actually in item name and price when I typed it. When I say add row, it basically got added to table data, and we have this additional row. Simple. No big deal in it. This is the simplest of the React examples that I can show you. There is one point I wanted to show you. This is the code for this. Yeah, the point that I want to focus on is that here I have also included the total price, okay, which is basically the sum of these numbers. And when I added a third row, this got updated. Where did I? Okay, just before my question, let me just show you my code. Initially, there is this dot state. I have the table data. Two rows are there. Form data is a blank thing. Logic to add row is like, as anybody of you would guess, just read it from the form data and push it to this one. Push it to table data inside the state. This is one function for changing the input. Nothing unusual. The part I want to focus on is the way I have calculated the total. This is inside render function. Okay. So not much of business logic should go inside this very, very sensitive area. But here I felt total calculation is something very simple. So therefore I can safely put it here. Are you able to read the code at the back? Okay. What I did is at the beginning of render function, I said let total is equal to 0. I kept it a very local variable. Here state.tabledata.map, while iterating, I kept on updating the total, right? And at the end, I said total price is rupees so and so. Looks good. One question. Suppose this was not a simple calculation. Okay, there was something else from here. I had to pass to another function, does some complex calculations and then updates the total. Suppose if it was like that, then what is the alternative that I have? This coding looks sensible for the only reason that my total calculation involves a very simple addition. My question to you guys is, had it not been a very simple calculation, what should I have done? Life cycle methods? How? Like what exactly?
After state changes, we could have done this calculation in component node and
Component, okay.
Do it in Adro.
Do it in Adro itself. Okay, I do it in Adro and then where do I put it? Were you saying something? Yeah.
Put it in a state there or a class.
Put it inside the
Do it
state.
in Adro.
Okay.
And do the calculation on the state of class.
Yes. Any other ideas?
Lifecycle component will update. So if component is going to update.
Component will update.
So calculate.
There are two things, component will update and component did update.
So you can do that after did update, like in did update.
Did update is the safer place.
Yeah.
Right? Because I need to be sure that the addition has been successful. Right? Or as he said, you could put it inside the state. Can you put it inside this? Sorry.
Class variable, right?
Yeah, class variable. Is there any problem if you put it in this? Can you think of?
then the AI will not be able to populate key how to operate it.
Yes. So then what will happen is, addRow happens, and then in the addRow function, which handles that button click, the things would have, the computation would happen properly. Total's new value would happen. We put it inside the this dot total is equal to this. State is not affected, but on the UI, it will still show the older value, right? Because your UI is outsourced to React, and it changes, keeps it in sync with the state. Nothing has changed on the state. Then why should you update the thing on the UI? Simple. Okay, I think it's done. I should wind up now. Before we wind up, any questions? Just give it a minute's thought in case you have something you want to ask or ended my session. The thing. Any questions?
So I have one question.
Yeah.
Let's suppose my state had like 10 things to update. Like I have price, I have something else as well. Like
10 things to
variables.
update into the state. Okay.
Yeah, state has 10, like state object has 10 things to update. And suppose on click of something, I update a single variable inside state. This dot set state set to a new value of this particular value.
Right.
Okay. So this thing I'm doing on multiple clicks or some AJAX request or something like that. But only I'm updating one value out of 10 every time a this dot set state is called.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me one thing, the diffing algorithm is called every time this dot set state is performed, or is it called after the entire this dot set states of a component are called?
What do you mean entire this dot set states of a component?
Like entire life cycle has been completed. Life cycle calls are completed. And now I'm setting this dot set state a value, certain value to a variable inside set state.
So the this dot set state is actually a step that triggers the UI update.
Yeah, so it will call render again and again, right?
It is supposed to call it only once. Ideally, it should call only once. It is sometimes called multiple times because of some flaws. Now, this flaw need not always be a huge mistake. It is sometimes, consciously also done that. But sometimes the extreme case of this would be like setting a set state inside render, wherein the application would directly handle. Right. So, what was your question?
Actually, you didn't get my question. So
Yeah.
I was saying is, suppose you have made a tree structure over it, right? So suppose one node of the tree got updated in a this dot set state.
Yeah.
So this change is only a single change, right?
This dot set state, you update
This is
one
a single
thing.
change.
Right,
Single
right.
component has changed.
Yes,
so
yes.
this would be like pulled over to actual UI, actual DOM as well, or it will wait for some more changes if the diffing algorithm is there some threshold or what? Like if it has crossed this many updates, then only it will give it to actual DOM, or is it something
That
like
is completely the diff algorithms problem. I mean, as I said in the beginning, that is something completely happening inside
Okay, so
React handles everything. We as developers are only the end users of this. So it is completely its responsibility that it has to be in single state and props. Now, in your case, there is one particular component in that you change some one particular data point, right? So first of all, it will update the UI for that component. That is one thing. Second, it will also check if there is anything else. Like suppose if that state is also passed as props to a child component, then that child component's props has changed. So that component will also be re-rendered, right? So that whole system is taken care of. Yes, yes, sure.
Okay. So in your case, if you have 10 states, you should have a separate component. If one state changes, change a component, you should have a separate component. That is a fix. First thing. About your question, it doesn't call random method always. When you do set stage, except user triggered actions. Whenever there is a lifecycle method gets called by React, unless that method is completed, your render will not get called. Okay, so in your execution, if you have 10 times set states, it will call render after 10 set states. And so that's one thing. That's the ideal React app. Okay, I have seen one React app which gets called every time where the render gets called every time you do the set state. So there might be a setting as well, but by default there is no setting.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
You didn't see